I'm Cherie Curtis. I'm a grade 3 teacher at Parkview Junior School, and today I'm going to be doing a maths lesson that would happen in a grade 3 classroom, and it's to do with place value. And when you think of place value, you think of hundreds and tens and units, and you think of the how muchness of number. So how much is 523? And to do that, I use something called base 10 blocks. Some people call them Dean's blocks, and I call them base 10 blocks. So what we first do is we take a unit. So lots of the American people call them ones, and some of the children do as well because it's referred to ones in their textbooks. So I ask the children to find one block, and we put that on our whiteboard. It's often very nice to have a whiteboard for the children to work on, especially for the children that have spatial problems. You want them to be able to put their things onto something. So we have ones, and we say, okay, that's one block, that's number 1, it is 1 unit. Let's find 10 units. And then we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now we say to the children, they have 10 units. Now I ask them to look for a tens stick. And I've got a grey 10 stick here. And I ask them to put it down next to their 10 ones, or their 10 units. And I ask them to put them in a straight line, and then they will then see that 10 units are the same as a 10 stick. So 10 units is the same as a 10 stick. Then I say to them, find the hundreds square. And here's a 100 square. And I ask them to look at all these little blocks joined together. And now what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to lead them to discover that 10 units make a 10, and 10 tens make 100. So I ask them to put the hundreds block down, and then I ask them to try and find how many tens make 100. So they put their tens right on top of the tens block, and they'll see because there's lines, and then they'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And they will see that they've got 10 tens making 100. So that's the first step into getting them to understand the numerosity of number, or the place value of number. So then I ask them to put all their blocks back off their whiteboard. And the next thing I ask them to do is I ask them to build me a number. And I haven't written any numbers on the board yet. As a teacher, the children will have the blocks in front of them. And as a teacher, you can have your whiteboard with you if you think that the children are ready to see the numbers in the abstract form. So the first thing I'll do is I'll start with a 2-digit number, a smaller number. And I'll say, let's make the number 23. Now what a lot of the children will do is they'll start doing this. 1, 2, 3, and they'll count out 23 ones. And that's not what you want them to do. You want them to think of the number 23. And you ask them to listen to the number, you ask them to say the number 23. And you get them to take 2 tens blocks. And there's 10, 20. So now you've got the 20. Now listen to the number again, 23. How are we going to make the 3? We take 3 units blocks. So we've made the number 23. Now I'll say to them, look at that number 23. How many tens are in the number 23? And they'll say 1, 2. 2 tens are in the number 23. How many units are in the number 23? They'll look at their units blocks. 1, 2, 3. 23. And now you can start getting a little bit more complicated, and you can say to them, you've got the number 23. Let's make that number 200 more. And now hopefully they will pick up the hundreds block first, and they'll realize that there's 100 here because you've shown them that 10 tens make 100. So they'll pick up 100 and they'll place it down. And then they'll pick up another 100 and they'll say, okay, and try to coach them to make their hundreds on the left facing them, the tens and the units, like you would write a number, hundreds, tens, and units. So you would say, okay, you've built the number 223. How many hundreds are in the number 223? And the children can actually see, look, there are 200s in the number 223. So once you've built a few numbers and you've asked them how many tens, how many units, and how many hundreds are in a number, you can start extending them. And you can say, let's make the number 13 more. And then they would have to pick up a 10 stick and a 3 units. And they would have to be able to put the tens with the tens and the units with the units. And then you can say to them, now what number have you made? And they would have made 230, and then you can ask them to group them in 3 and 3, 236. And again, how many tens are in the number 236? Then they would count their tens, and they can see there's 1, 2, 3 tens in the number 236. So that is how you can do a Dean's block lesson or a base 10 block lesson. And this is what we call seeing number in the concrete form. Because you can physically touch the concrete apparatus, you can touch a 1, you can touch a 10. We talk about this being the concrete apparatus. And you as a teacher can be writing these numbers on the board if you feel that the children are ready for it. So now that we've done a base 10 lesson or a place value lesson with the concrete apparatus, we're going to try and move the children to a semi-concrete lesson. And when I say semi-concrete, they can still see the numbers and they're still going to build the numbers, but they might not have the blocks in front of them. So what we have here is we have our flashcards. And it can take quite a process to set them out. So you can usually use your faster kids to come first to the mat. And you can have sort of about 10 children at a time on the mat with you. So it's called a micro lesson. And you get them to put all their units on the right. These are all individual cards, as you can see. So those are your units or your ones. Then you have your tens and your hundreds. And you have them, you usually start from 1 and you go to 9. So this is what we call the semi-concrete, because they can still see the numbers, they can still build them, but we've moved away from the concrete, which is our Dean's blocks or our base 10 blocks. So the first thing I'll do is I'll ask them to build a number. And I always start with 2 digits, as I said, and we make a 2-digit number. We can make, let's make 75. So first of all, they would pick up their 70, and then they would pick up their 5. Or you might get a child that will do this. They'll pick up a 7 and a 5, and they'll put that next to each other. And that's actually what you're trying to teach them not to do. You want them to realize that 70 looks like this, and when you want to make 75, you actually put the 5 over the 7, the 0 of the 70. So now they've made 75. Now you can say, let's open up that number, or let's break up that number. The grade 3s often have to learn the word decompose because it's used in their tests. So let's say, let's decompose the number. Let's break the number up. What 2 numbers make up 75? 70 and 5. Let's put the number back together. Let's build the number. And you can also say to them, looking at the 7, it's the digit 7, but what is the value of the 7? And you can show the children that the value of the 7 is actually 70. So now they've made 75. You can ask them to put the number back, or you can ask them to add to that number depending on the level of your children. So I'm going to say, let's make that number 500 more. And they would automatically pick up 500. And you might need to help them and coach them, and they need to realize that 75, when you have your 500, then you have your unit there, your tens here, and then your unit, and you would put your tens on top and your unit on top. So you can see that they're actually building the number 575. And now you've built the number. Now you can say to them, let's decompose the number. Let's see what 3 numbers make up the number 575. 500 plus 70 plus 5. And at this point, you can actually get the children to write it on their whiteboards, or you can write it on your big whiteboard while you are on the mat. So let's build the number 575, and you get the children to write 575 on their whiteboards is equal to. And you will get them to write 500 plus 70 plus 5. 500 plus 70 plus 5. And this is what you're going to get them to do in their books. But this is the process leading up to this. You can't just expect the children to write this in their books and know what this means. So we do it on our whiteboards, and then they can go to their books and they'll write this in their books. So we make the number again, and you can actually extend your learners quite nicely. You can say, let's make the number 13 more. So if they think of the number 13, they're going to add a 10 to the 70, and they'll get 80. And then 13, the unit in 13 is 3, so you can add 3 to the 5, and you'll get 8. And now you've made 588. And again, you can get them to write the number. 588 is equal to, let's decompose the number. What three numbers make up 588? 500 plus 80 plus 8. And then the next step, once they're comfortable with their flashcards and building the number, then you can go to your board and write a whole lot of 3-digit numbers and ask them to break the numbers up into their books. So this is an example of our quad books. They're called quad books obviously because they've got a whole lot of little blocks. And this is how they are breaking up numbers in their quad books. So you've got all of your numbers that you want the children to break up, and they put an equal sign and 1 digit in each block, and they write 100 plus 70 plus 4. And you can see here, you can make it quite complicated when you have 409. They want to tell you that there are no tens. They can put 00 here. I prefer them to not say that there are any tens and to rather just say that there are hundreds and units. So today we did a place value lesson, and we did it in a few steps. We started with our Dean's blocks, or our base 10 blocks, which were our concrete apparatus, which they could actually physically build and see the numerosity or the values of the numbers. Then we moved to the flashcards, which was the semi-concrete, where they could still build the numbers physically, but it was a more abstract representation of the tens in the form of numbers. Then from the flashcards, we moved to the whiteboards, where they wrote what they could see from the semi-concrete apparatus. And then finally, moving to the complete abstract version that you would write on the board, then the children would do the abstract in their books. And I think the important thing to realize is that there's a process with learning place value. You can't just expect the children to understand place value and the numbers. So the process that we used is very important to help cement the real understanding of place value and the value or the numerosity of numbers.